So just very, very briefly, the top left, this was a study that came out of Mississippi that looked at the relative risk of different settings for spread amongst children, and really found that those social activities outside of school, sports, extracurriculars, was a higher rate of higher risk of spread than an in-person school setting. The one on the right, on January 7th, this came out of Norway and looked at specifically primary school settings, so elementary school settings, and showing a very low risk of spread in elementary school settings. What they did also acknowledge is that we have some more data on our elementary school settings than middle and high school as well. So we still are going to need to continue to look at some more data on middle and high school as well. The pediatric one, this was the one specifically done in North Carolina. This was the ABC study done with our partners from Duke and UNC. I'm sure you all are familiar with that one as well, and overall showed a lower rate of transmission in school settings as opposed to community settings. And this one showed actually no transmission of children to staff, at least in our North Carolina data. The JAMA article that came out just on the 26th last month, this was a compilation of many of the studies, so it wasn't an original study, but it looked at many of these different studies, and then again came overall to that so far that conclusion that school settings tend to be low-risk settings. And then the bottom left one, you may have heard this one as well. This came out of Wisconsin, looked at actually all schools, so K through 12, with high rates of adherence to preventive measures, so mask wearing, social distancing where feasible, and the Wisconsin experience across all of their grades, again, showed low risk of transmission and low risk of child to adult transmission. So just a little bit of summary of those specific data. You have the hot links to all of those studies if you want to go directly into them. And if you have access to this deck, then I wanted you to have those hot links so you could look at those yourself. Okay, the next slide, please. And so this is excerpts in a couple slides. I will make sure you have the hot link as well to our kind of what are we learning. We're trying to bring all of these studies together in one place so you can dig into that data. But overall, what we are continuing to learn is that with preventive measures in place, and that's really important, with preventive measures in place, because we do know there are places, for example, you may be familiar with Israel. When they opened up their schools, they had a lot of cases, a lot of clusters, but they had very low rates of preventive measures when they opened up those schools. But what we are finding that if preventive measures are in place, then the increasing evidence does suggest low rates of transmission in primary and secondary schools, even with high rates of community transmission. And so, for example, the Wisconsin study, there were high rates of community transmission in Wisconsin when those schools were open, and again found those lower rates of transmission in school, even in a setting of high rate of community transmission, which is good news. Other take-homes from these studies was little evidence that by opening schools contribute to increased rates of community transmission. That overall, again, not a no, but low rates of child-to-child and very limited to no transmission from child to adult in in-person school settings. And then again, just to highlight again the North Carolina study that found those lower rates of transmission in a school relative to community transmission. Next slide, please. But again, the importance, it's not without preventive measures, so it's really important that we are having good alignment and adherence to those preventive measures that we have in that strong school toolkit, that looking at schools that had high rates of face coverings and other preventive measures showed low rates of transmission. Interesting, some of the studies really were suggesting that the lower rates in school, or showing that school settings actually may be a protective setting because, in general, the high rates of adherence to those preventive measures that are going on in schools that may not be going on outside of schools. And that was the hypothesis of that Mississippi study, that kids and adults, to be honest, are more likely to be exposed in social settings, extracurricular settings, because of the lack of adherence to those preventive measures. So schools with those high risks, the high adherence, can actually be quite protective. that both mask use and hand hygiene is important. And then I do want to just talk a little bit about the 6 foot, 3 foot, because I do know that that's been a really important area of conversation and topic, and just let you know where the recommendations are nationally and how that feeds into some of our policies. So the CDC still recommends that 6 foot social distancing is the most health protective, and recommends that 6 foot social distancing as much as possible where feasible. However, there is some evidence that 3 foot of social distancing can give you some protection and can reduce that risk of spread, but still 6 feet is still what CDC is advocating as the most health protective. On the next slide. So this, I know you can't read this, but I just want to be sure that you are aware of that this is that compilation, our What Are We Learning data brief. You have that link to that data brief if you want to look at that. I highlighted the bottom 2 sections so that you could read it, but the top section as well, I just want to remind people the top section was the one that really talks about that overall, not no, but overall, what we are finding is that in general, younger children, less likely to have infection, less likely to transmit. So still seeing that even lower risk among our younger children in terms of transmission. So on the next slide, bringing all of that together, so all of that science that we're continuing to learn, again, lower risk of transmission in younger children, and then the low rates of overall transmission in school settings with good preventive measures. The American Academy of Pediatrics did put out some revised guidelines. I have the hot link to that if you want to look at that. Again, advocate very, very similar to what North Carolina has, the position we are in, is that one, you need that comprehensive layered preventive strategy, so you need to put all of those 3 W's together. And then where they commented in terms of this 3 feet, 6 feet is that is likely a greater impact of physical distancing on risk reduction in secondary school, so older kids, middle and high school, than early childhood or elementary education. Again, that's bringing together where we've talked about before is overall your younger kids are even a lower risk, so that that 3 foot or the may give you more protection in those younger kids, but that more physical distancing may be more important in the older children. And so you'll see the AAP recommendation for that 3 foot, 6 foot for elementary schools say that desks should be at least 3 feet apart, but still ideally 6 feet is ideal for those elementary schools. And then you'll see when they come to middle and high school, really advocating more for holding to that 6 feet as much as possible. Okay, next slide. So with all of that study, I'm going to turn it back to Chief Deputy Secretary Gail Perry to talk through then how that translates into our North Carolina policy decisions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tilson, and I think that is a great segue into the updated schools toolkit that we released in conjunction with, as Chairman Davis mentioned, the press conference earlier this week. So again, I think the primary changes to the toolkit really clarify and emphasize, based on what we know about the research that Dr. Tilson just presented and are continuing to learn, is that there are a real strong call to action, even when there are higher rates of community transmission, which is currently still the case in North Carolina, with those strong preventative measures. That what we're really looking for is in-person instruction to the fullest extent possible, 5 days a week. So, and I think what Dr. Tilson didn't talk as much about, and I do want to highlight here, is recognizing the risk for children when they're not in school, and the academic and mental health harm that I know this board and many local boards have wrestled with, thinking about the well-being of children when they're out of school and relying solely on remote instruction. So that is why we have made these updates to the toolkit. You can see there, just to clarify, students in the kindergarten through 5th grade, and again, aligning with the AEP recommendations and the science that kindergarten through 5th grade students should return to in-person instruction 5 days per week to the fullest extent possible while still following the public health protocols in the toolkit. It has been known as Plan A. I just want to be super clear here. The only difference between Plan A and Plan B has to do again with that 6 feet of social distancing. That is the only single difference. It does not speak to the mode of instruction. So, and then in the 6th to 12th grade settings, again, students should return to in-person instruction 5 days per week to the fullest extent possible while following all the protocols in the toolkit, including that 6 feet social distancing, again, emphasizing the layering of prevention strategies, the lasagna that Dr. Tilson just talked about, and adding in that extra layer of protection for our middle and high school students based on what we know about transmissibility in older children versus the younger children. I think that we did just add, and obviously the remote learning option continues to be a necessary option for those teachers, children, and families that are at higher risk. And so on the next slide, this is just a chart right out of the toolkit that shows the differences again. If we could switch to that next slide with the chart, the what's the plan chart. Again, you can see all of the exact same prevention measures, in-person instruction, a remote learning option, with that one difference being that 6 feet of social distancing for the 6th through 12th grade students. Next slide, please. Did just want to take a moment to talk about where we are in terms of vaccinations. We talked about this at length last time. We are currently still vaccinating our healthcare workers and long-term care staff and residents, our older adults. So again, getting at those groups of individuals that are really at the highest risk for exposure and also at the highest risk for severe illness or death. We still have a ways to go to get to those populations, in particular our older adults. So that's the active group that we're currently in, but right behind that group will be frontline essential workers. And again, that's where our teachers and our childcare providers fall in that frontline essential worker group. Next slide, please. I think that might be it. We are happy to conclude here, Chairman Davis, and take any questions that folks have.
Thank you so much. Questions from my colleagues?
Chair Davis, I have a quick question. This is Olivia.
Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you so much. And good morning again. Your presentations are always so informative, and I continue to take lots of notes. Going back to the discussion about the research part of the presentation, can you predict the future of research, let's say definitely in the post-pandemic, but over the next 3 to 5 years in the area of K-12 and what we have learned about children in the school setting and the safety protocols? Do you have any idea where the research is headed?
I think it's hard to predict, but I'm going to actually let I'll defer Dr. Tilson to you to read the future.
Yeah, I often called to look at my crystal ball, and I always like to make the disclaimer that my crystal ball tends to not always be that clear. But what I will say is I think that this is, and has been recognized as a critically important issue. And I think that really thinking through how we keep our people safe, not just in a school setting, but all sorts of settings, and with the amount of data and experience that we have, I definitely think that this will be a rich topic of research going forward. I think we still have a lot of unanswered questions, and I think that I would anticipate people are going to continue to look at this question very robustly because it is so important going forward. So I think I would predict that, again, trying to think through what is the efficacy of different prevention measures, although that's going to be a little difficult because they are all layered together, and then also trying to understand the risk of age versus settings. So I think we'll still see more that. Where I hope we will also see more research is in thinking through the impact of children that aren't in school. Unfortunately, I think this is going to be a really troubling book of literature going forward, is what is the impact of children who haven't been in-person learning, and how does that fall out across socioeconomic, racial, ethnic lines. I do think we're going to have literature on the harms of the academic, mental health, social, food pieces. I will say that's the piece of literature that is the most anemic right now, and I keep trying to look for that hard data on the negative impact of kids not being in school, and there is not that robust literature. So I anticipate that will be coming as well. And unfortunately, I think that we will always have respiratory viruses out there, and I think we're seeing more of an uptick more and more of the global spread, and so I do not think that this is going to be our last pandemic. I hope this is one of our most severe ones, but I think us really understanding how pandemics play, or lots of respiratory viruses play in a school setting, is going to be really, really important, and I anticipate there'll be a lot more data going forward. So,
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair. Thank you. I just have a couple of brief questions that I will admit are based upon what my educator constituency has concerns about. So the first question is, the research presented, is any of the data in the research based upon any of the three more virulent strains of COVID-19, the South African, Brazilian, and UK strands? That's question number one. And two, just as I see in the sequence, the frontline essential workers are number three, and I think that that's important. But about the sequence, is there any particular reason why the return to school sequence is not contingent upon first executing vaccinations for the educators and school personnel?
So I'm happy to take the second part of that question and then let Dr. Tilson speak to the different strains and the research. In terms of vaccination of teachers, so I want to be really clear, and I'm actually going to quote from the new director of the CDC, who just said yesterday, quote, "Vaccination of teachers is not a prerequisite for safe reopening of schools." And she specifically speaks to the importance, again, of those mitigation protocols. And I think it's important for us to remember that the studies that we're talking about are all really looking at rates of transmission without vaccination being in place. So these are relatively low risk settings, and it is really those prevention measures and mitigation strategies that are so critical. That said, as this slide that's here shows, teachers will be part of the next frontline essential worker group. We are really focused, though, right now, again, on those really, really older folks, those very high-risk folks, some of whom are educators, who are at the highest risk for severe illness and death, and at very high risk of exposure because of the healthcare settings that they're in. And Dr. Tilson, I don't know if you'd add to that and if you want to speak to the strains.
Yeah, I agree with what you had said. And then in terms of the strain, so a couple things. One, we do know that viruses shift all the time. And so there were probably some variants that were going on when these studies were being done, when if you look at that date, that mostly was looking in the fall. These known variants that have come to public attention, they're all very new. So the studies that I was talking about have been done, again, collected data throughout the fall. So specific to how these viruses have played in a school setting, we just aren't there yet because those are new. So I would that we do not have specific studies on these new variants and how they play in school settings, that we need some more time for that. However, I will say we do know they are variants of the same respiratory virus, and looking at again the power of the prevention and those 3 Ws, I still think that those 3 Ws will still be give a fair amount of protection for those as we have those different variants moving along. But no, specifically these studies were done in the fall.
So I appreciate the answers to those, but just to be clear, so the data on the mitigation strategies is based upon largely variants that were less virulent and less communicable potentially. And so while they may be effective with those, it's unclear as of yet how effective they may be with these more contagious strains. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess that would be fair to say. Yeah, because these were done in the fall without the prevalence of these new strains that, in general, more transmissible. I think the data is still out whether or not they're more they cause more severe disease. So yes, I think that is a fair statement.
Thank you.
And the only thing I'd add to our health experts' response is that as a state, particularly led by our governor, we are advocating for increased number of vaccines. The big issue is the supply of vaccines. Demand far exceeds the supply, and as a nation, we've got to ramp that up significantly in order to combat this virus. Other questions from a colleague?
Yes, really appreciate you noting that particular point, because supply is right now very constrained, and that is the driving factor in us being able to reach all of our eligible groups is very limited supply. So that is the number one priority, is getting more vaccine to our states.
Other questions?
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Lieutenant Governor.
Yes, I don't have a question. I was just offer my thanks to everyone who's involved in doing these studies. I think this is the essential part that's going to help us to be able to open our schools again. And as I've traveled the state, and certainly in my office, the number one issue that keeps coming up is when are children going to be back in school? And I don't think we'll be able to do that safely and properly without these studies. So I just offered my thanks for all your hard work on this. And I feel confident that if you continue to do these studies, the schools can open up. And if anything comes up, I'm sure you all will be on top of it and will let us know. So thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Other comments, questions?
Chair Davis, I have one final question.
Dr. Oxendine.
And this is probably, it may go both ways to the DHHS as well as department. Are we keeping track or collecting any kind of, on a systematic basis, the number of schools in North Carolina that are, the extent to which they are fully open? Do we know that?
Mr. Chair, this is David Stegall.
Thank you, Dr. Stegall.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Go ahead, Dr. Stegall.
Yes, sir. I just want to let you know, yeah, that is updated typically daily during the week, and we have ongoing, and I can send through Ms. Townsend, Dr. Townsend Smith, the link to that where you can see in real time the number of districts, how many students in each district, and what plan they're on.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to know.
Falwell. Deanna, is he unmuted? Yeah, Treasurer Falwell, can you unmute on your end?
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Just a question for the presenters. Do you have a log of the number of vaccines we have received in this state, who they went to, and the age of the people that they went to? Of the million or so vaccines that have been given, do we have that type of accounting for those vaccines?
I'm happy to take this unless Susan, I'm happy to do it. Yeah, so I hope you've seen our public dashboard on our vaccine dashboard. Actually, we just got national recognition for of our data transparency on our vaccine dashboard. But we have, to pretty great granularity, exactly the number of doses, the first doses, the second doses, the age, race, ethnicity, and then we're also going to be doing that and bringing it down to a county level as well. So I really welcome you to look at that vaccine data dashboard. And then if you have other follow-up questions beyond that, we're happy to take that. But we have tried as much as possible to have that great level of transparency and accountability of all of where and to whom and what age the vaccines are going to. So I really welcome you to look at that vaccine dashboard. And then if we can answer more questions beyond that, we are happy to.
Follow-up question. So when a public relations person who, for example, may work for a hospital who tweets out that, I don't know what age this person is, maybe they're 35 years old, that they brag about getting this vaccine, I know that it wouldn't have that level of granularity in your dashboard. I just want to ask you if you think that the issue of people financially getting access to this vaccine is systemic or non-systemic, or people getting vaccines that are not in any category, which is keeping a vaccine from an essential worker like a teacher. Do you think that is those are one-off issues, something that keeps you up at night, or are those, do you think there could be some systemic problems in people as they're vying and scratching to get their hands on a vaccine?
So I'm happy to take that. I would say that we have very strong and clear guidance to our vaccine providers about what groups of individuals should be getting vaccines. We have a very clear framework that is really based, again, on the highest risk of exposure and the highest risk of severe illness and death. When we do get information that there may be vaccine providers who are not following the prioritization that the state has set, we certainly follow up with them. There is a role for individual responsibility here in terms of folks getting the vaccine who are in fact in the eligible group, and there's always going to be that element of people assuming individual responsibility and being truthful in their answers when they're getting their vaccines.
Thank you. And last one, Mr. Chairman, and these are not unfriendly questions. They're questions that are meant to build trust and confidence, not to destroy trust and confidence, but people are hearing and seeing these things go on. When you go to a provider who, where somebody that works for them has publicly done things like this, do you say don't do that anymore? I mean, what are the real repercussions of somebody who took these vaccines and kept it out of the arm of someone who was an essential worker or higher up on the priority? What are the real repercussions of people that you've entrusted with this vaccine who have done this and they admitted to doing it?
Yes, sir. Obviously, we have a variety of tools at our disposal, including the way decisions are made about allocations to vaccine providers. And we would be happy to follow up, on any specific concerns that folks are raising.
Thank you. So it doesn't sound like you think this is a systemic issue then.
I would say it's fair to say that we don't have evidence to suggest that there's any systemic issues. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and I will add one other thing as well, that one of the first things we do as well is that if we hear of something, we then go and directly and ask that provider what happened. And so, for example, the case that you had brought up earlier, just remember that somebody's job doesn't necessarily mean the role that they play as part of this response. And so it may be that somebody, regardless of their title, actually are part of the vaccination clinic, and so the role that they play is different than their job title. And so one of the things that we do is that if we hear of something, then we call that provider and really understand what happened, and is it just that, and if it seems to be a course correction, we make it, or if it was just a misunderstanding. And a lot of times it is that, again, they are now playing a role that is different than their job title. And so, but one of the things we first do, of course, is call that provider and really understand what's happening.
All right, thank you, Chief Deputy Secretary Gail Perry, Dr. Tilson, for this report, and please pass on to your colleagues, including the Secretary and DHHS, how much we appreciate the partnership. We look forward to continuing to make progress in combating and ultimately defeating this virus. Thanks again.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
We now come to our special recognitions, a time on our agenda when we recognize significant awards, proclamations, resolutions, and those who make a difference in the lives of the public school students we serve each day. At this time, I'd like to recognize Dr. Stegall and Dr. Day to highlight two important recognitions: our Global Ready schools and our school counselors. Dr. Stegall.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I do believe that Dr. Day will start us off, and I'll turn it over to her for the first recognition.
Thank you, and good morning. The North Carolina State Board of Education vision states, every public school student in North Carolina will be empowered to accept academic challenges, prepared to pursue their chosen path after graduating high school, and encouraged to become lifelong learners with the capacity to engage in a globally collaborative society. North Carolina's future depends more heavily than ever before on students graduating fully prepared for jobs and life in a globalized society. It is important that students graduate from North Carolina public schools globally competent and ready to understand and act on issues of global significance. In 2011, the State Board of Education appointed a task force on global education with a focus on bringing to the full board recommendations that would foster global competence in our public school graduates. The final report, Preparing Students for the World, released in January 2013, provides a set of recommendations for ensuring that every student who graduates from our public schools is prepared to be a globally engaged and productive citizen. Recommendation 4 called for a Global Ready designation process for schools and districts that commit to ensuring their students are globally prepared. To date, 10 Global Ready schools have been recognized by the North Carolina State Board of Education. I am honored to join you today to recognize North Carolina's most recent Global Ready school designations. The Global Ready designation signifies a district's or school's commitment to ensuring students are globally engaged and productive citizens. To achieve this designation, districts and schools complete a rigorous application process. This application includes narratives and links to evidence which demonstrate the school's effort to prepare students to live, work, and contribute to an interconnected world. Successful Global Ready school applicants implement best practices in global education, thereby impacting their students, school, and community. The North Carolina Global Ready School Implementation Rubric is built around NCDPI's Global Ready School Attributes, which describes characteristics of a high-quality, Global Ready school. The overarching principles and 10 attributes define essential components central to global education. The same type of rubric, including principles and attributes, exists for districts as well. Schools and districts can be recognized through the Global Ready School or District designation process by demonstrating that they meet the criteria on the rubric at the prepared or the model level. It is my pleasure to announce that Davidson Early College in Davidson County has achieved the Prepared Global Ready School designation. Davidson Early College implements systems and structures to support global readiness for all of their students, such as integrating global competency into curriculum pathways and creating opportunities for students to develop career-related and/or post-secondary global learning skills. These sound, well-embedded practices show positive impact on students. At this time, I would like to invite Principal Mcgee from Davidson Early College to say a few words.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Day. Good morning. First, I would like to thank Dr. Emily Light and Dr. Dina Coley, our superintendent, and our assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction for all of their support through this process. I have to thank RTI and Mr. Frank Mcgee for all of his direction as we navigated this process. I would like to thank Davidson Davie Community College, especially Mrs. Suzanne LaVenture, who is their Director of International Education. She continues to be a valuable resource for us as we strengthen our commitment as a global ready school. And last but certainly not least, I have to thank the faculty of Davidson Early College High School. When I became the principal here almost 3 years ago, they had already begun this journey of becoming a global ready school. And with the help of all the aforementioned individuals, we were able to define what this would mean for us, and it truly became part of who we are and how we educate students. I like to say COVID might have put the brakes, a little speed bump, a little glitch, so to speak, on what we do. But once we became familiar with the new techniques and strategies of educating students in this remote/hybrid environment, we pivoted right back to where we were before, and that is to empower students to positively impact the global community. A global ready scholar, Davidson Early College High School Global Ready Scholar is a culturally aware communicator. They are creative thinkers and problem solvers. They're collaborative team members, lifelong learners. They're academically prepared to take responsibility. They're globally competent citizens. They're personal professionals. And in a world where anyone can do anything out there on the internet, they are technologically savvy information consumers and producers. I'm very proud to be an educator with the Davidson County School System. I am honored to be the principal of Davidson Early College High School. I am amazed every day at what my faculty and staff do and for kids, and I'm very proud of our students and the graduates of Davidson Early College High School. Thank you.
Thank you, Principal Mcgee and staff, for your commitment to global education. I am also honored to announce that Glen Arden Elementary in Buncombe County has achieved the Prepared Global School themes and problem-based learning throughout the curriculum and developing inquiry-based instruction around global issues or themes. Thank you to Glen Arden Elementary staff for your commitment to global education. Congratulations and thank you to both of these schools for their hard work and diligence in preparing their students to be globally engaged citizens. In addition to recognizing the 2 newly designated Global Ready schools, I would also like to recognize 1 district and 3 schools who recently earned renewal status. Schools and districts receiving the initial Global Ready designation of prepared or modeled hold this status for 3 years. After 3 years, schools and districts may apply to renew their current Global Ready designation. Onslow County Schools successfully renewed as a model Global Ready district in 2020. Onslow County Schools consistently implement systems and processes to support globally prepared students. Global readiness is embedded in the district's culture, and the well-developed cutting-edge practices show consistent high-level student impact. Their district global education strategic plan is firmly in place and supports the development of globally competent students. Onslow County Schools is a leader for other districts to replicate. Harrisburg Elementary in Cabarrus County successfully renewed as a prepared global ready school last year. Many components of global education are embedded school-wide, such as classroom experiences that include collaborative problem solving of global issues relating to real-world current problems. These intentional efforts are yielding positive and lasting impacts on their students. Harris Road Middle School in Cabarrus County also successfully renewed as a prepared Global Ready school in 2020. Harris Road Middle offers a variety of global learning experiences that are aligned with the curriculum, which helps students demonstrate an understanding of global issues from different points of view. Their commitment to global education is well evidenced and school-wide. Carolina Forest International Elementary in Onslow County successfully renewed as a model Global Ready school last year. Global readiness is embedded in the school's culture. Engaging global content has been fully integrated into the standards and into all disciplines. Their strong partnerships with local, global communities, organizations, and nonprofits encourage students to explore multiple perspectives. Carolina Forest International Elementary is a leader for others to replicate. Thank you to these schools and district for continuing to show a high level of commitment to global education. I will now turn it over to Dr. Stigall for our next recognition.
Thank you so much. Today, we have the pleasure of recognizing Ms. Vanessa Barnes, Dean of Students, Counseling, and Student Services at Millbrook Magnet High School at Wake County Public Schools. Ms. Barnes is being recognized as a top 5 finalist for the National School Counselor of the Year, which is amazing. In her role at Millbrook, she collaborates with the school's counseling team, student support services, and school staff to develop a comprehensive school counseling program, which benefits all students in the areas of academics, social and emotional support, and career and college readiness. Under Vanessa's collaborative leadership, Millbrook Magnet High School has been recognized nationally 3 times as a RAMP school. RAMP stands for Recognizing ASCA Model Programs. That indicates exemplary implementation of the American School Counselor Association national model for school counseling. And North Carolina, and counselor professional and the North Counselor Professional School Counselor Standards. That's a mouthful. In addition, Vanessa is a past president of the North Carolina School Counselors Association and continues to serve on their board. Vanessa also has been an online course facilitator for the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction and CFNC's Career and College Readiness Program Professional Development Collaboration the past 6 years. She was Wake County Public Schools School Counselor of the Year in 2019, and in the 2019-2020 school year, Vanessa was selected as North Carolina School Counselor of the Year, which made her eligible for consideration for the National School Counselor of the Year in 2021. The School Counselor of the Year application process requires extensive evidence of exceptional implementation of comprehensive school counseling programs integrated throughout the school community. To be selected as one of the national top 5 national finalists is quite an accomplishment. It's my pleasure at this time to invite Ms. Vanessa Barnes to say a few words.
Good morning to everyone. Lieutenant Governor Robinson, State Superintendent Truitt, Board Chair Davis, and all other distinguished members of the State Board of Education and the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. It is an honor to be present this morning to represent school counselors throughout the country as a finalist for the National School Counselor of the Year competition sponsored by the American School Counselor Association. I'm even more excited today to represent North Carolina as it is my home. Currently, we are celebrating National School Counseling Week, and the theme this year is All In for All Students. School counselors have truly been all in during this time, which finds us with remote learning and hybrid instruction and lots of different things in between. But we still have not stopped providing social and emotional support, career and college readiness, and looking at housing and food insecurities, equity and access, and also making sure that students have a link and a bridge to college access and academic support. So we definitely appreciate your support of us, particularly during this week, but every day as we work as essential workers too, in working to make sure that all of our students are supported each day. I'd like to thank the state always for your support. A special call out to Cynthia Floyd, who serves as our state consultant. We get to collaborate a lot, as you just heard. And I'd also like to thank my district and my school who give me support each day, and especially helping me to flesh out some of the many activities and ideas that I come up with in my department to make sure that we're serving students in the best way possible to make sure that they have options once they graduate. Last but not least, I'd like to thank my family and my friends, many of them who are live streaming this morning. They give me wings each day and they are my village. And it's just a pleasure to be serving as a school counselor, particularly in North Carolina, and having the opportunity to receive this recognition on behalf of all school counselors and the mighty work that we do serving our students, families, and our communities each day. Thank you for, within the midst of your busy agenda, to take the time to recognize the important work that we do every day. Thank you so much.
Congratulations once again, Vanessa. We very much pulling for you and thank you for your leadership. That's all for our recognition, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Skull and Dr. Day. The board wishes to extend its congratulations to all of our Global Ready schools, to all of our school counselors, and particularly to you, Ms. Barnes, for your achievements and contributions to our students' education. The research, school data, and informal observations convince that students and schools are more successful with the great support and comprehensive services provided by school counselors like Ms. Barnes. And as she mentioned, to help focus public attention on the unique contributions of school counselors, the National School Counseling Week 2021 has the theme School Counselors All In for All Students, celebrated the week of February 1st through 5th, 2021. This highlights the tremendous impact that school counselors have in helping students achieve their academic and personal success and plan for their future. Our thanks to all of our school counselors across the state, and appreciate all you do for our state's 1.5 million students. At this time, we're going to make a slight change in our agenda and move the superintendent's report to later in the agenda and move forward with our issues session. Last month, we received updates from our Southern Region Education Board partners who provided an overview of opportunities to strengthen our licensure program. Today, DPI staff will provide a proposed plan of action. Ms. Kamnitz, chair of the Student Learning and Achievement Committee, has represented the state board in this opportunity, and I recognize her to introduce this issue session. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Lately, we've had a series of issue sessions leading up to today's presentation, including, as Chair Davis just said, hearing from Stephen Pruitt and Megan Boren of SREB about their multi-state efforts and the other roundtables that have been meeting across this country with their help. Today, I feel like we're at the big reveal, and our presentation today is going to be led by two of my colleagues on the North Carolina Education Capital Roundtable, Tom Tomberlin and Andrew Lakis. They will walk us through the Roundtable's proposal for recruiting, training, retaining, and rewarding a diverse and excellent teacher workforce in North Carolina, which ties right into our strategic plan and also to Superintendent Pruitt's North Star. Before Tom and Andrew begin, I'd like to ask all of you to hold your questions until they get to the end of the presentation, and then we'll take questions. Thank you. Tom and Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. Thank you, everyone, for having us this morning. And we are honored to be invited to present on behalf of the North Carolina Education Human Capital Roundtable. Last month, you all heard from Stephen Pruitt and Megan Boren, as Jill mentioned, from SREB, introducing ideas put together by the Education Roundtable here in North Carolina. And today, Tom and I are here on behalf of our Roundtable colleagues to present more details on the vision we have developed over the last 2 years of intense work. As you heard last month, SREB convened the North Carolina Roundtable. SREB purposely decided to keep the Roundtable small to foster an environment of creativity, honest and open sharing of ideas, safe critical feedback, and productivity. We worked with funding partners to select a small but key group to bring to the table. The North Carolina Human Capital Roundtable represents all state education agencies, some practitioners, the education boards, and advocates. There's no chair or leader of the roundtable, and that is by design. Every member and the organizations and stakeholders they represent has equal weight. And here on the screen, you can see a list of both the agencies and institutions represented and the individuals who represent those agencies. So as the roundtable came together over 2 years ago, we had one goal, to keep great teachers in the classroom and attract highly qualified, diverse candidates into the profession here in North Carolina. This won't come as a surprise to you, but we grounded ourselves in this idea that the pipeline is shrinking. We have hundreds of critical vacancies across the state. More than 10% of our teachers are inexperienced or uncertified. Less than 20% of our teachers identify as people of color, and only 5% of college students plan to become teachers, and that number continues to decrease. Yet, the Roundtable is committed to this goal that every student deserves an excellent, effective teacher. And our mission was to find a way to make that happen with the stakeholders in North Carolina. So as a roundtable, we spent the last 2 years identifying, researching, brainstorming, and debating how to significantly reduce the teacher shortage issue. This collaboration, innovation, has led to a bold vision that we are confident will increase the quality, quantity, and diversity of the teacher workforce in North Carolina. Tom and I are here today on behalf of the Roundtable to discuss how North Carolina could explore policy changes to teacher licensure, support, and salary structures to transform the teaching profession and ensure that every student has access to an excellent, effective, and diverse teacher. I want to draw your attention to the slide that's up here now. We're going to stay here for a minute as I give a framing, and then I'll pass it to my colleague, Tom Tomberlin. But, you know, what we've worked on as we came to this challenge, the place that drew our attention the most was our teacher licensure system, because it's the major policy vessel to transform the teaching profession, in our opinion. Simply put, teacher licensure governs who can teach. So it's key to the conversation if you want to increase the number, quality, and diversity of who is in classrooms across North Carolina. But to make substantial positive effects on the teacher pipeline, we believe, in our 2 years of research and talking to stakeholders, we must redesign our teacher pathways, our teacher licensure systems, our support systems, and the teacher salary schedule. Many states around the country are creating tiered licensure systems that establish different pathways and foster teaching advancement. Yet our research shows these systems are not leading to the significant positive change states seek regarding ending shortages and increasing quality due to three key missing pieces for many of the tiered systems. The first is that they rely almost mostly on input-based measures rather than outputs that measure a teacher's skills, competencies, instructional abilities, and effectiveness at what we all want and know great teachers do: help students learn. Second, we see a lack of consistent required support mechanisms like teacher mentorship, quality, individualized professional development, and a collaborative culture around recruiting, growing, and supporting teachers as they progress through the profession. And third, and we do think this is critically important, as we have not found this in any other state, these other tiered models neglect to create state-based compensation structures that support movement through these tiers. We believe this is a key mistake other states have made when moving to a tiered licensure system, because they're not incentivizing advancement across the entire state to help beginning teachers become professional teachers and professional teachers to become advanced teachers, and tying that to compensation. Too often we've seen in the other states we've studied that when incentives are left up to the districts or the local LEAs to offer their own, it actually creates an inequitable distribution of excellent teachers and does not standardize their growth across the state. So we've examined these systems around the nation, and really these are the three trends that have come out. And I want to underscore one that we think is critical to this entire bold vision for how we might reimagine our licensure process. And it's when we look around the country, as I mentioned before, almost every licensure system is based on input measures. Fewer than half of the states in our country even include any output-based measures. We believe strongly that this should be reversed. We know in North Carolina we have a robust data collection system. We know that our principals and our students and our LEAs and the state board and every other entity is focused on our students' learning. That's what our accountability system is based on, and we measure student growth. Yet our licensure system doesn't take that into account. We believe that by changing our model and making an outcomes-based licensure system, we actually set clear expectations for what we expect of teachers and how teachers can advance in their career, earning their license and continuing to grow in the profession. For this to happen, though, we see a few kind of key components of this change, and they're alluded to on this slide here. We believe we have to open the gates to let anyone who wants to teach have the opportunity to demonstrate their abilities with strong support for growth. Not only do we believe this will open up the pipeline and remove some of the barriers that we know structural challenges create, including structural inequity, it'll also help us increase our recruitment across the state and the diversity of our teacher force. We also want to open pathways. And so our model and this bold vision suggests that we increase alternative pathways to the classroom. We bring in apprentice or residency teachers who have an associate's degree to co-teach, to study and practice in the classroom with strong support while they finish their degree and to become teachers. But one thing that's critical in this model is that all requirements for all teachers, no matter what the pathway, the outcomes will be the same, ensuring that we have an equitable feeding system from early high school recruitment, grow your own initiatives, alternative preparation pathways, traditional pathways, and lateral entry career changers. One of the things that you may be thinking here as you've thought about this issue is, what do we mean by this shift from inputs to output measures? Simply put, right now, our licensure model and most licensure models across the country focus primarily on things like degree level, years of service, assessments that we know don't have a correlation with student learning outcomes like the praxis. We're proposing, and our vision for this is to propose that we move towards a knowledge and skills mastery, demonstrated competency, and growth and effective instruction model, where we say, first and foremost, is this beginning career teacher moving the needle for students? Are they learning and are they growing? And if they are, how can they move through the licensure pathway and on into advanced levels of licensure in the classroom throughout their career? This is where we believe tying a new salary schedule to these output measures is going to be incredibly powerful in both attracting, retaining, and keeping those teachers in the classroom long term. With this, the fourth component of our model is that we believe there have to be comprehensive supports in place for teachers in their first through fifth years. We see that as when teachers leave at the highest levels. It is also where the complexity of our current licensure model tends to bear its burden on teachers as they're navigating these early parts of their career. And we want to ensure that the licensure process is user-driven, that it's easy to navigate, that every teacher who starts in North Carolina knows that their advancement in their career will be tied to how effective they are in the classroom with students. And we want to build better quality professional development, incentivization, and mentorship in order to make that a reality for those teachers. And last, and Tom will get to this as he shares more of the details of the model, we want to make sure that we retain teachers longer by offering a standardized approach to advanced teaching roles so that their advancement and the growth of their impact can be by them remaining in the classroom, earning more money, taking on more responsibility, and building off of some of the lessons we've learned through advanced teacher pilots across our state. I think that the one image I'll leave you with at the vision level before I pass it to my colleague, Tom. I've thought about this a lot as we've done this work over the last 2 years, and I think it's probably not a coincidence. I go back to like my fifth grade self growing up in High Point, North Carolina, and thinking about two experiences around that time in my life, and I think it stands out to me because I began my career as a fifth grade teacher and had my own experiences with licensure almost 2 decades ago. But the current licensure model we have reminds me of a game I used to play at that time in my life called Mousetrap. Many of you have maybe played it before, but it's a Rube Goldberg. You know, the goal is pretty clear. You want to catch the mouse at the end, but the way you get to catching that mouse takes a great deal of precision and everything falling exactly right and having to spin the needle and move up a ramp. And just if you do it right, you'll catch that mouse at the end. But another thing I learned about in fifth grade and the Scholastic Reader was the Autobahn and the interstate system in the United States. And this idea that if you actually know where you're going, you can create a pathway that allows people to go at the speed they need to go to get there. And I think we've thought a lot about, as we've done this work, how the current system we have is complex, it's complicated, it adds burden, and it isn't aligned to the outcome we want, the destination we want, which is all of our students learning at an incredible level. And so our vision for this is how can we streamline, how can we base this on outcomes, and how can we get more and more great teachers in classrooms across North Carolina. With that, Tom, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, board members. I'm Tom Tomberlin, Director of Educator Recruitment and Support, and proud member of the Human Capital Roundtable. I would like to walk you through the high-level conceptual outline of a reformed licensure model for you. And I would like to start that with a brief overview of our current licensure policy. So the goal of any licensure policy, any state's licensure policy, is to allow only qualified, well-prepared candidates into the profession, and to prevent our students from having a potentially ineffective teacher in the classroom. So with those goals in mind, we want to look at how our current licensure system either supports or detracts from that goal. So within our current system, like most other states, we do a fairly good job at meeting those goals. But our current system does have some unintended consequences for our potential teacher or for potential teachers. The first of which being that these policies, that is in regard to the examinations, the standardized examinations for content and pedagogy, have a disproportionate impact on people of color. This is an empirical finding from the research. Our minority candidates and quite possibly our economically disadvantaged candidates have a much more difficult time meeting these standards than other candidates. It is also true and has been demonstrated by presentations that this board has received from our partners at EPIC, particularly Dr. Kevin Bastian, that our licensure exams are not strongly correlated with evidence of effectiveness in the class. So teachers who pass these licensure exams are not necessarily more effective than the teachers who are teaching in our schools who cannot demonstrate a passing score on those exams. We also know that with a narrow entry path to the profession, that sometimes our teacher pipeline is restricted. And when teacher supply is missing for our LEAs, these positions are often filled on an emergency basis with untrained, unlicensed individuals, in other words, long-term subs. In many cases, students having a long-term sub over the entire course of the school year results in that student missing out on the opportunity to grow and progress academically at the same rate as his or her peers. These policies can also block some quality candidates from entering the profession. I'm sure as board members, you've all gotten emails from candidates who are coming to us either with a PhD in the content area, or someone from the industry who wishes to come now and teach in our North Carolina schools, and they are stymied by the requirements to do so. And so our policies in some way affect or block some of these highly skilled professionals from entering the teaching force. So if we look at the current licensure policy, we've demonstrated here that we have a very narrow entrance into obtaining an initial license. A candidate must have completed an approved educator preparation course program, or have a bachelor's degree with the requisite number of content hours in the licensure area. So this restrictive nature only allows a certain number of teachers into the process. And once they're in that process, you can see here from the box, the rectangle we've created, teachers just kind of move around in this, what I call the wilderness, the licensure wilderness, for a minimum of 3 years as they seek to meet those requirements that allow them to exit on the other end, which would be the continuing license. And that is a very narrow pathway as well. It is built solely around demonstrated performance on a licensure content exam, and passing the content pedagogy exam, which is currently the EdTPA or PPAT in our system. These in no way is the effectiveness of the teacher who's in this wilderness considered when we're allowing them to exit into that continuing license phase. Additionally, there are no clear off-ramps to indicate to teachers that they may not be well suited to the profession. They are provided with a litany of requirements. In many cases, they are left to their own devices to meet those requirements while they're trying to learn the skills necessary for being successful in the classroom. And so often these teachers stay in the system for quite a while, 3 years, and with our limited license opportunities, we could have teachers in the system for up to 6 years before they get the information that they're not meeting the qualifications for becoming a teacher. That is a long time, not only to keep a teacher on the hook, but also to subject students to a teacher who may be not very effective. Next slide, please. So the Roundtable envisioned a new pathway or new process for licensing teachers, and they've settled on the title, North Carolina Pathways to Excellence for Teaching Professionals. And their vision offers early, inclusive, clear passage into the profession. It rewards excellence and advancement and encourages retention. So the idea here is to broaden that entrance. Let's attract more candidates to the profession, and give them opportunities to start learning from the first day that they enter the profession. So we can think about a teacher candidate who may only hold an associate's degree. How could we leverage that person, bring them into the profession in a very structured and scaffolded way so that they are learning the profession from the beginning as they work on that requirement to hold a bachelor's degree, and they move through the process. What's really important in the model that we're proposing here is that we build in tiered licensure systems. So teachers are not just handed a laundry list of things they have to do within 3 years, but the licensure structure itself moves them along and sets clear expectations for each phase of that licensure system. Included with that system are clear exit ramps for teachers who cannot meet those requirements. Part of this is to also offer multiple opportunities for a teacher to demonstrate that effectiveness. Currently, we rely solely on these standardized exams, but what if we expanded our notion of what it means to be an effective teacher or to meet those competencies to incorporate other student-based outcomes that could serve as meeting those licensure requirements? If and only if a teacher is unable to demonstrate effectiveness along any of the multiple pathways that we provide for the teacher, then we would exit that teacher from the process. This also model, the hope of this model is that those teachers exiting, that is, this initial phase, that are moving towards that continuing license phase, are effective, have demonstrated outcomes with their students that indicate that they are effective or highly effective teachers. And so the current situation we have now is many teachers that are effective teachers cannot move through that pathway because they can't pass the licensure exam. But the converse is also true. Those teachers who have facility at test taking and can pass the licensure exam, but do not demonstrate themselves to be effective with students, they have the opportunity to pass through that gateway. And so that is one of the concerns that the board, that the Human Capital Roundtable is trying to address. Next slide, please. I know that it can seem that off-ramps in the profession seem to be at odds with the idea of promoting, increasing the teacher pipeline. But this is a really important part of the process because teachers need to have clear expectations, clear timelines, and multiple opportunities to demonstrate that effectiveness. But ultimately, if a teacher cannot demonstrate that effectiveness, then he or she must be exited from the profession. The risk for our students is too great to allow an ineffective teacher to continue to operate in our schools. So these clear off-ramps would only be engaged if the teacher demonstrated a lack of content or pedagogical skill or competency. They cannot demonstrate effectiveness with their students, and they did not meet the time to complete the required requirements or the requirements of the license. I need to be very clear here that we need, in order for these exit ramps to be solid, we need multiple avenues for teachers to be able to demonstrate their effectiveness. A single measure is not inspiring the profession, it's not inspiring our legislature, and it's also not inspiring the board that a teacher who can't pass a licensure exam should be exited from the profession. And so having those multiple opportunities is very important for making these exit ramps clear and valid for our stakeholders.
Thanks, Tom. So our vision, the vision being put forth by the Roundtable, is that you'll see here on the screen, is a 6-tier licensure system. The North Carolina Pathways to Excellence for Teaching Professionals that is based on outputs. You move a beginning career teacher would move through each stage of this licensure process based upon their effectiveness. They'll have multiple pathways to enter, and then they'll have multiple options throughout the process to demonstrate their effectiveness, which we believe gives teachers more autonomy. It is a simpler, clearer outcomes-based model, which we think will actually entice folks to enter the profession as opposed to scare them away. And also, if we add the compensation to this, as we mentioned before, we believe we can support them while also rewarding their growth. You know, I think stay here for one more second. I think, you know, a couple things to point out about this model, because I know it's small on the screen here. The first 4 tiers there, learning permit, license 1, license 2, license 3, are your early career educator. And they move through each of those by demonstrating content proficiency, by demonstrating competencies in the classroom, and then by demonstrating student growth and learning. When you get to license 4 and then the 5 and 6, which are advanced roles, we see this as an opportunity for the state to standardize and codify advancement in the profession. Again, based on outcomes, the effectiveness of a teacher at doing what we know we all want them to do, which is move the needle for students, our students learning and our students growing. We also think one of the power in this model is that it incentivizes teachers to continue to advance in their career, and that the teachers in stage 5 and 6, the advanced teacher roles, also will then play a pivotal role and be rewarded economically for supporting, financially I should say, for supporting the early career educators in tiers 1 through 4. So we believe this could be a self-reinforcing system that continues to develop and grow educators who are able to deliver on the outcome that students, parents, and all of you care about and we care about deeply, which is having an effect and an impact on students in classrooms across North Carolina.
Thank you, Andrew. So let's walk through some of these levels of the license, and we'll begin with the apprenticeship role. As we talked about earlier, how can we leverage students in our community colleges that are coming out with an associate degree, looking for employment? How can we help attract them to the teaching profession? So this idea of a apprenticeship role, we should think of our current system, the 2+2 pathway that we currently have for teachers. How can we incorporate that into the formal licensure process? So a teacher or a candidate coming from a community college with an associate degree could apply for a learner permit to become an apprentice teacher. They co-teach under an expert teacher while working on earning a bachelor's degree for 2 to 3 years. This comes with a salary, presumably more than a current teaching assistant, but less than a fully licensed teacher, as well as benefits. This gives this apprentice teacher hands-on teaching experience while they're going through the process of earning a bachelor's degree. Apprentices will act as support to a teacher of record. And if we think about how that could work, we think about the advanced teaching roles we have currently, especially those that are leveraging the opportunity culture model, where you have an advanced teacher working closely with an apprentice teacher or an early career teacher. It is different than a teacher assistant role. It is part of the licensure process, and it has clear expectations for advancement. We certainly would welcome all those teaching assistants that want to move through this pathway into the program, but we would also recognize that some teachers may prefer to remain as a TA, and so we're not advocating the elimination of the TA position, but rather an accompanying pathway to full licensure. Next slide. So next we come to the teacher in residency. These are teachers who do hold a bachelor's degree, and they may or may not have the required content knowledge that we currently require, or they could enter through industry certification and 5 years of experience in the industry and for our CTE teacher route. They would advance through the system by demonstrating skill and competency, or they could use demonstrated effectiveness to move them through the process. They receive a professional and advancement account specifically targeted to their growth and development, and they would be in consultation with the principal and their mentor, would utilize those funds according to their chosen pathway to moving through the system. This would limit the cost of this kind of professional development, be that enrollment in any university to fulfill that requirement, or for teachers who hold the bachelor's degree in this demonstrative effectiveness, it could be targeted professional development opportunities to increase their content knowledge or their pedagogical skill. But they would be the agents of how those professional development funds serve the process. DPI, what this would also allow for us is DPI would be allowed to track, be in the position to track those funds and how they're used. Our vision is that ultimately DPI would create a kind of consumer report of professional development activities or professional learning activities that help teachers move through this process, and those activities that do not help teachers move through the process. so that we can help guide teachers in the appropriate selection, and we can demonstrate the impact of these professional learning opportunities on the teacher's effectiveness, ultimately with the goal of increasing student achievement. So we must recognize in this model that North Carolina data indicate that the best route to teacher preparation is our traditional EPP model. These teachers on average are more effective than teachers who come to us through different alternative routes. They tend to persist in the profession longer than these teachers. So we do not want to create a model where a traditional program is disincentivized, or we're encouraging teachers to avoid that kind of model. It is and remains the most effective pathway for our teachers. And so how can we incentivize students to go through the EPP process? Well, if we think about what the EPPs are designed to do, they are designed to ensure that the teachers have the requisite content knowledge and the requisite pedagogical skill to work in the classroom. So teachers who avail themselves, candidates who avail themselves of the traditional route should be in a position to meet the content and pedagogical requirements for the license upon completion of the program. If they are able to do this, in other words, if they've passed the content licensure exam, or they've passed the pedagogy exam, the EdTPA or PPAT, those teachers would be able to enter the profession at the license 3 stage. And with that would come additional compensation over of what a teacher who's entering the profession at the license 1 or license 2 phase would be. So this builds in an incentive, a market incentive for teachers to continue to consider the traditional route to educator preparation. These teachers who enter the license 3 would still get a mentor. They would still get access to professional development funds, that targeted professional advancement account, and they would have up to 5 years to demonstrate their effectiveness in the classroom. Our current model says that a teacher has to have 3 years of teaching experience. We would continue with that, at least 3 years of teaching experience. This model adds on the additional layer of demonstrated effectiveness with students in the classroom as the key to advancing to the license 4, what we consider the continuing license today. This would also provide incentives for our EPPs to develop other programs and opportunities for their preparation that may be targeted towards other methods of meeting the requirement for demonstrating the mastery of content and pedagogy for our teachers. So it may not only be a licensure exam that teachers can use to demonstrate this effectiveness. They could, as the board has heard a couple of meetings ago, North Carolina is exploring micro-credentials. How could micro-credentials serve in this capacity to, for a teacher to demonstrate their effectiveness in the classroom with students along the lines of content and pedagogy? So this expands the notion of what it means to be effective for our EPPs, and I'm confident that our EPPs will rise to that challenge and develop alternate ways for teachers to demonstrate those competencies. So when we think about this content and pedagogy options for teachers, so the goal of the roundtable was to provide agency to the candidate, multiple pathways to demonstrate their competency, not just the sole licensure exam, and to allow for more meaningful alternatives that better correlate with effective teaching and student learning. So the proposition here is to provide a menu of options for our teachers. One, we would recommend keeping the assessments as one way to demonstrate that mastery. Two, explore creating micro-credentials that are competency-based and reflect evidence of impact on students for satisfying that content and pedagogy requirement. And three, using demonstrated effectiveness with students in lieu of the testing. So, of course, one obvious way to do this would be EVOS, but we want to be very clear that we think that is that would not cover all of our teachers. So we have to think of other ways that a teacher could demonstrate effectiveness with his or her students for those license areas that are not covered by a standardized test from the state. So the rationale for this is practice tests often serve as barriers to a diverse workforce and do not correlate with effective teaching. Although the EdTPA and Foundations of Reading and Math have some correlation with improved student outcomes and higher teacher effectiveness. Next slide. So then we get to the license for the expert teacher, which correlates to what we currently have as our continuing professional license. One of the challenges we have with this is our current licensure system. The renewal period for these teachers is 5 years, and the teacher renews the license based on continuing education requirements, but nowhere is effectiveness with students considered in the renewal process. So these CEUs are largely based on time spent engaged in a professional learning opportunity, and in no way reflect any outcome of those professional learning activities as for the advancement of the license. So we would like to see a renewal cycle that focuses on positive student outcomes to drive the renewal, mastery of content, skills, and competencies in their instructional capabilities above and beyond what we saw for meeting the initial requirements. And here, again, multiple measures are fundamental, providing teachers with many pathways to demonstrate this effectiveness, but maintaining the position that teachers must show impact on students and their learning and their growth and their advancement in order to renew the license. You can see the bubble here. What should these multiple measures of effectiveness be? That would be part of the when we go to operationalize this model. That would be a conversation with our partners who will help build this model out. Another issue that this would address is in the data nationally and in North Carolina. We see what is called the teacher plateau. Around the 5th to 7th year of teaching, teachers reach what will ultimately be, in most cases, on average, reach the plateau of their effectiveness for the rest of their career. This model would impact that plateau in that teachers have to constantly be refining and strengthening their practices in order to maintain that positive impact on students, and would encourage a continuous growth mindset for our teachers from years 5 to 30 as they work through their professional lives. In addition to the license for the expert teacher designation, the Roundtable envisioned advanced credentials beyond that license 4. And there are 2 specific areas that they focused on. A master teacher who demonstrates classroom excellence. So these are teachers with extraordinary impact on student learning. And how can we acknowledge these teachers, place them in a position where they would have even greater impact on a larger number of students in the school. And then the master teacher of adult leadership, teachers who demonstrate the ability to help other adults grow and increase their capacity. So as you can imagine, these 2 advanced credentials would serve the advanced teaching roles and compensation programs that are going on across our state. This licensure would help standardize what it means to hold those positions, and how we can ensure that every student in every classroom has access to a teacher of excellence in our state. The adult leadership would be really important for recognizing our mentors who have demonstrated skill in helping teachers grow and advance in their own careers, how they can turn struggling teachers into good teachers, how they can turn good teachers into great teachers. Many opportunities here. The goal here is not to restrict the districts and how they innovate in using these roles, but to help establish a minimum threshold for what it means to be in one of these positions.
Thank you, Tom. So again, just to bring you back to the kind of visual model of what we have in mind here, we think the key components of this are five things, or we're proposing five conceptual changes to the way we do licensure. The first is to open the gates and remove the arbitrary barriers that keep talented individuals from entering the profession. The second is to open innovative pathways for entering the profession and putting early career educators in the driver's seat with clarity of what it will take to earn a license and to progress in their career, and also the options that are afforded to them to grow and learn and make that progress. The third is to shift from relying on inputs to relying predominantly on output measures, and to tie the progress that an educator makes or a teacher makes on these outputs to increase salary. The fourth is to build practice-based early career supports. So when that teacher is in a classroom with a mentor and being supported and learning and growing, we want to surround them with supports that they can tap into and leverage in years 1 through 5 as they earn their license and advance in their career. And the fifth component here is to create advanced teaching roles and licenses statewide, where we believe we can expand the impact of our strongest teachers and retain them longer. And with that fifth piece, we also just want to reiterate, we believe there's an opportunity to legislate higher pay for that classroom leadership because of the impact it will have on those early career educators. Also just want to note here that no other state in the country has made that move to legislate higher pay for these advanced roles at the state level. The Roundtable is currently seeking feedback on this vision, and we've been engaging with educator focus groups over the past several weeks and will continue to do so in the future. We hope others will be open to the possibilities created by this vision and be willing to join in the conversation. Next slide, please. We believe that this vision is the template for success. North Carolinians will win if state leaders consider, review, and build on this vision, because the idea clears the way for a better, more diverse, more equitably distributed teacher workforce and can help restore the respect the profession deserves. It also will allow the public to be assured that licensed teachers are demonstrating increased mastery in skills, knowledge, and instructional capabilities in clear and consistent ways. The idea will also entice early career educators and those interested in making a career switch to our state, because North Carolina would be the first in the nation to innovate in this way. And lastly, this would be an investment in our teachers and our students, but also an investment for North Carolina's workforce and economy as a whole, as teaching is the profession that makes all other professions possible. We've prepared some handouts for the board that outline further reasons and rationale for our ideas, and we hope you'll take time to review those. And the last slide. Roundtable members have also written a letter we would like to share with the board today, and we encourage the board to hear more details on the vision we've created from some of the Roundtable members at an upcoming meeting, to consider engaging more stakeholders to give feedback on this vision, and to take action to explore making this vision a reality in policy and implementation. It's a bold vision, no doubt, but one we believe will position North Carolina to be a leader in the country on this front, and to align our licensure system and every other piece of our teacher development system that touches it to the outcome our state cares about most, that every child receives a basic and sound education and has access to an excellent and effective teacher throughout their entire education. I want to say thank you, Chair Davis and board members, for allowing us to speak to you today, and Tom and I are here to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin and Mr. Lakis, and Ms. Kantz for your leadership on this most important issue. Comments or questions from my colleagues?
Chair Davis, this is Olivia. I have a quick question.
Oxendine.
This is out. First of all, this is fascinating work, and I'm going to have to go through the PowerPoint maybe one or two more times to grab hold of all the pieces, because it is conceptual, but it shows a lot of promise in the area of licensure. My question is this: since 2013, with the legislation that was passed that removed master's pay, I wonder if Dr. Tomberlin, this might be a question for you to ponder. I wonder if at the level 4, when at the expert level, master teacher classroom, master teacher adult leadership, arriving at that status, how would that compare to a master's degree? The reason I'm asking, if there is a salary attached to that bump up, would that compete with positive way? Would that be comparable to a master's degree, let's say in elementary education or science education or K, whatever the master's area might be?
So let me understand the question. So if we looked at a teacher who is currently being paid on the master's salary schedule, would we envision the advanced roles or the license 4 even as being comparable with that salary designation?
Yes, I mean, could the two pieces marry in some way?
I feel like there's two questions here. So the intent of the Human Capital Roundtable was to provide that expert teacher and above license to those teachers who demonstrated excellence in promoting student learning and student achievement and student growth. So the idea of the board of the roundtable was to position that salary. We don't have any numbers associated with salary. That's part of the operationalizing of the model. But theoretically, we would see that license 4 as being on par with a teacher who had a master's degree at around the 30-year mark, which would be roughly $50,000, let's say. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but that's the idea. And then the advanced teachers, if you think about a master teacher with national board certification, that teacher at the top end of the scale is earning about $63,000. We would envision those advanced roles being in that neighborhood. But to answer what I think might be underlying your second question, would we see a master's degree or any other professional learning approach as being an indicator of those outcomes? And the answer to that question would be no. The beauty of this model is it remains agnostic to the inputs. It remains, however a teacher gets there, we're agnostic to that. What we're really looking for is their impact on student learning and growth? And if that's achieved, we would not go back to what the input was and say we're paying for that input. We're paying for that outcome.
Okay, that adds some clarity to it. And if, Chair Davis, I do have a quick follow-up. Going back to the industry career pathway and the residency, I think there was a / residency piece to that. Is there a salary differentiation between that span on the continuum and the traditional pathway into the profession? Do you envision that? Do you envision that being the case? Rather, that's a fair question.
So I think in all cases, any movement from one of these tiered license areas to another would come with increased compensation. It would be the work of the implementation team or the operationalizing team to define what those look like. And those would have to be done in conjunction with budget, OSBM, and us understanding the budget implications of all that in order to clearly suggest what it is. But I think in general, to answer your question, movement from license 1 to license 2, we're incentivizing the teacher to meet those competency requirements as quickly as possible, because that affords them the opportunity to advance their license level as well as their compensation.
Okay, and presently that's missing in the system.
Yes, it is. In our current system, it's all driven by years of service.
Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin and Chair Davis.
Superintendent Truitt.
Thank you, Chair Davis. You all know that I am such a fan of this work. I am so incredibly excited that this is the direction we are heading for many reasons. My question is this: where do you see those competencies, if at all, being tied to our current teacher evaluation system? And can we ensure that there's an opportunity to revise the rubric for our current teacher evaluation system? I personally find that process to be very cumbersome for school leaders as well as for teachers, and for lots of reasons that I won't go into right now, that work needs to be revisited and changed to reflect the spirit of what you are presenting to us today. So I guess the specific question is, will the competencies be tied to that instrument?
That is a great question. Mr. Lakis, do you mind if I answer that question?
No, go for it.
Okay, I don't want to hog the spotlight. I think it should, is my initial answer. Do the data suggest that it could? Currently, no. So, and I think this goes back to the reason that this group, the Human Capital Roundtable, decided to focus on licensure. These changes to licensure are going to necessitate changes to the entire human capital system for our teachers. So I would hope that we would want to incorporate teacher evaluation into this process as part of demonstrated competency. What I can tell you as the person who has exhaustively analyzed that data over the past 7 years is there's very little indication in the data that it could serve that purpose. So one of the goals of this work, one of the broad goals of this work, is to reform those other processes that should be supporting this work and make them compatible with what we're trying to achieve here. Does that help?
Yeah, it does, and I absolutely look forward to engaging in that work with the Human Capital Roundtable, and look forward to further discussions. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions or comments?
Chair Davis.
None. Yes.
Sorry, Chair.
Bristol Smith.
A little slow on the unmute button. So Dr. Tomberlin, radical, incredible, liberating, out of the box work that the Roundtable has done here, and so excited to see where this takes us. Wanted to ask if you could foresee a time in which the success of this model in terms of exposure and increasing the on-ramps into the profession for those early stage explorations of the career was somehow assessed or tracked or measured or visible at a 30,000 foot level, so that we could get a sense early on, as this is in a state of perhaps initial beta for the first few years of how successful the model is in creating those on-ramps for folks that may be non-traditional, typically non-traditional candidates for the teaching profession. I ask because, of course, I'm thinking about like the My Future in Seat model, and that we're looking 10 years out and trying to narrow the gap between our workforce needs and the number of qualified candidates with high value credentials. Wondering if you could foresee some similar type of a metric or a tracking system or way of seeing how successful the model is in the early stages while it's being baited.
I think there's definitely opportunity for that kind of analysis. We should be able, as you saw in the makeup of the Human Capital Roundtable, the community colleges are represented and are very strong partners in this work. So looking at the current contribution of the community college system to the human capital pipeline for North Carolina educators is a good, we need to get that baseline and see what's actually happening out there. And then looking very closely into, does this model increase that participation or increase that movement of teachers from the community college into the teaching profession? I think that would be one of the many evaluation techniques that we would need to employ to understand the strength of this model.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Chair Davis, this is my final question to Dr. Tomberlin.
Sure.
It has to do, Dr. Tomberlin, your earlier comment about the 2+2 pathway that we currently have in place as perhaps entry to the apprenticeship piece of on the continuum. Is it robust enough and effective enough that you feel like it could inform entry into that part of the pipeline, the first entry point?
So I think if the recommendations of the Human Capital Roundtable are adhered to, in that these teachers are working closely in a support role to a highly effective teacher, it could strengthen not only the support teachers receive from currently the TA position, it could strengthen that support for teachers, but it could also be a viable pathway. And those teachers, I'm pretty confident, would have the necessary skills and knowledge to function in that role with the proper supports.
Okay, thank you.
Hearing no other questions, I want to express my appreciation to the board's appreciation to every member of the Human Capital Roundtable, and particularly Dr. Tomberlin and Mr. Lakis, to you and to Ms. Kamnitz as our representative. Since literacy is the most important issue that we can focus on for our students, I think this issue around moving licensure for our teachers forward in accordance with this model is the most important thing that we can do to support our teachers and to grow and strengthen the profession. And as the thoughtful questions from my colleagues have pointed out, there's a whole host of opportunities to think through in terms of how to implement and transition from our current model to this model. And so I'd offer without objection that we refer this work to the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission, commonly called PEPSI, to study this model and to provide a series of recommendations for the board on how best to implement this model and other implications associated with how we support our teachers, educators through our human capital practices and policies. Thank you again, Dr. Tomberlin and Mr. Lakis and Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair
We'll
Davis.
now proceed to the remaining committee reports, and I remind committee chairs and the audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will be done at the end of the agenda via roll call. We'll now proceed to the Educator Standards and Practice Committee, and I call on the chair of that committee, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Myself, I was silent there for a sec. Thank you, Chair Davis, and I want to acknowledge the Vice Chair, Ms. Amy White, who joins me in the important work that we do regarding the leadership of the ESP. We have a collection of the first item is an action item. It's a collection of policy changes in the area of LICN 001, 0003005, and the evaluation 024. So Drs. Tomberlin and Evans will do the presentation, a quick run through the material related to these recommendations for adjustments, amendments into these four categories of licensure and evaluation. And then further down in the agenda, we do have a discussion item that is going to be presented to us by Dr. Seiberg, and it is related to, it's in the area of teacher education, TCED 008, and that pertains to some legislation that we know about related to the sanctioning of EPPs. We do have some adjustments in policy that we need to attend to, not today, but next month, because this is a discussion item. So Dr. Seiberg will be presenting that discussion item. But let's go back to the top of the bill, and we will begin with the items that pertain to action. Dr. Tomberlin.
Good morning again, board members. I'm Tom Tomberlin, Director of Educator Recruitment and Support, and we are returning to you with this action item related to audiology licenses in the state of North Carolina. I would like to be brief in this, but I'm happy to entertain any questions that board members may still have over this policy change. This policy change is designed to align our audiology licenses with the current practice of salary authorization for our speech and language pathologists. According to general statute, a doctorate degree is required in audiology, and this is reflective of practice across the country. There are no longer a terminal master's degree is offered in audiology, but only the doctorate degree. So in keeping with that, we would recommend that the board require a doctorate in audiology in order to be licensed. This would be effective July 1st, 2020. It would not affect any current licensure holders in the area of audiology. They could continue with their process under which they were granted their license. We would also, as part of this, recognize the certification, the North Carolina Board of Examiners of Speech and Language Pathologists and Audiology license as instead of a State Board of Education issued license. This provides a streamlined approach to licensure for our audiologists. They seek the North Carolina Board of Examiners license. They are held to the continuing education requirements for that license. And what the board would be doing now, much like speech and language pathologists, would be issuing the salary authorization to be paid on the teacher salary scale. We do have two Doctor of Audiology programs in North Carolina, East Carolina University and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. It's important to note that these programs are not affiliated with our EPP, and so this is further rationale for putting this back in the hands of the North Carolina Board of Examiners for speech language pathologists and audiologists. Of course, LICN 003 would need to be modified. We remove our current testing requirement and the cut score for the audiology license, and we replace that with the NCBOE SLPA requirements. Speech and language pathology for the license renewal, we no longer are requiring the 8 CEUs that are required by the State Board of Education, but will require that a teacher present an active NCBOE SLPA license for the renewal of their salary authorization. So that active license would indicate that the teacher has met the North Carolina Board of Examiners requirements for continuing ed in order to hold that license. And here is an outline of those changes.
Thank you very much. I'll pause and take questions from my colleagues if you have a question or two. Hearing none, then we will move on to the remainder of this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. So for the additional policy amendments, we'll be looking at LICN 001, LICN 003, and eval 024. So for LICN 001, we are looking at section 1.60, and this is around multiple licensure areas issued for a single residency license, and we just corrected the reference to find the requirements to clear those additional licensure areas. So we changed the policy from LICN 005, section 2, to the requirements found in this section of LICN 001.
Okay.
And for LICN 003, thank you. The first part has to do with aligning with statute around the testing requirements and that timeline for filling the testing requirements for licensure. Instead of the first year of employment, it is now the first year of the license, and it needs to be passed before or during the third year of the license instead of the second year of employment. And then for clarification for the field, we are specifying for the Chinese license, the dialects, Mandarin and Cantonese, to issue those licenses. And then for the last additional policy amendment, this has to do with clarification for the field around eval 024. This policy lists EPP requirements, and part of the confusion was by having the sentence, all student teachers shall meet in passing scores and mastery criteria to be determined by the State Board of Education. It makes it seem like the EdTPA and the PPAT, which are the pedagogy assessments, must be passed during student teaching, when in fact they are treated like licensure exams and have the same exact timeline as a licensure exam, which is attempt during the first year of the license and complete and pass by the end of the third year of the license. And then the last slide is a summary of all these policy changes. Thank you.
So you said the last slide is a summary?
Yes, this slide. Well, the very last slide, Dr. Oxendine, is for questions. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Evans. And do I hear any questions or comments from my colleagues? So this is the collection of amendments to the these policies, very clearly laid out and explained, and we will be voting on this item later this morning. So thank you very much, and we will move on to the next item, which is our discussion item. And this is going to be presented by Dr. Seiberg, and it is under educator preparation. The general statute is 115C. In other words, this statute is kind of the umbrella for the policy that's before us today that we will vote on next week, and he will, Dr. Seiberg will take us through those changes, those recommended changes. Dr. Seiberg.
Good morning, board members. Last spring, the lawmakers passed Session Law 2020-3 to address a wide variety of disruptions that the COVID virus caused across the state. In that law, Section 2.22, subsection F of that bill or law asked that this board provide to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee 2 data items related to COVID on educator preparation programs. In preparing for this presentation this morning, I did notice there's a little typo in your materials here. We're working to address that. I'm going to walk you through where those are. There are the 2 items.
Dr. Seibel,
I'm sorry.
I hate to interrupt you, but maybe it's just my computer. I'm still seeing the PowerPoint from the previous Dr. Tomberlin and Dr.
I'm sorry. So I think you teed me up, but I think maybe this one is for Tom. Oh. Yes, this one is for Dr. Tomberlin. I'm sorry, Dr. Tomberlin.
I'm sorry about that. We got a little out of order there. This, just to give the board members a brief recap of this action item, TCED 008 in regard to sanctions for our EPPs had some language that conflicted with state law. And so we've worked to align this policy with state law. Specifically, initially we had tried to provide a pathway for EPPs that go into revoked status to continue to accept students and provisionally recommend them for licensure. We found that to be in conflict with state law. So we have reverted to the state language that an EPP that is in revoked status shall remain in revoked status for 2 years. And at the end of that 2 years, the EPP may apply to the State Board of Education for initial authorization to once again prepare educators for licensure. So you'll see the amended language here that reflects the statutory language, and we have removed those pieces that would allow the EPP to continue to function under revoked status.
Are there any, to my board comments, do you have any question about TCED 008 pertaining to sanctions? Dr. Tomberlin, if you would go back to the previous frame, I believe I do have a question, a quick question.
Sure.
So the change as is that we will act on next month that's being proposed, the policy then doesn't prescribe, lay out any conditions for the EPP coming out of sanctions to be reapproved. Is that correct? So the policy is silent on that.
So actually, no. If you refer back to the language, and I don't have the policy number on the top of my head right now, but the initial authorization process for any entity coming before the state board is laid out in policy.
Okay.
So, in addition to that, the board would have the discretion to query the entity on any changes that they've made to address the issues that cause them to go into revoked status to begin with. So this simply puts them back in the initial authorization process, and that is a prescribed process in.
I see.
I see.
Thank you for that clarity. That's very good clarity. Okay, and then we will move on. And this is Dr. Seiberg. This is your part of the presentation.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry to jump the gun there earlier. So this is a report that's due to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee. It was 2 points of data that were referenced in Session Law 2020-3, which was the COVID adjustment law passed last spring. And I noticed there was a little typo in here on how these bullets are laid out. So I'm going to, just so you know, we are addressing that. The first item that they were asking for is the number and overall percentage of students who were admitted to an EPP with a GPA that was lower than a 2.7. And that the reason they're asking for that is because this law removed the 2.7 minimum GPA requirement for the 2020 and 2021 school year because of the COVID disruption. And then the second bullet is or item that they're asking information about is the number and overall percentage of students who had their clinical internships deemed completed. This data point was requested because the closure of the public schools last spring didn't just impact the students, but it also impacted the pipeline teacher candidates that were involved in completing their 16-week student teaching requirement. So the law allowed for those candidates to complete their obligation despite the fact that they didn't reach their 16-week obligation. And here the lawmakers are asking for the number of candidates impacted by this disruption. So in the attachment that we've provided you, the data associated with these two items are provided and they're disaggregated by institution for clarity.
Okay, very good. All right. Are there questions from my colleagues about this report to the JLEOC? If none, thank you, Dr. Seiberg. We do have one consent item that the State Board handled yesterday in closed session. I'll just certainly just do a quick synopsis of that. It was a special circumstance to issue an educator license without the authorization of the EPP, and that was due to the kind of excessive time that had elapsed between the graduation from the program and the time it took to fulfill the SBE licensing requirements. So yesterday in closed session, we acted on that and we approved that request. So that concludes my portion of the agenda. Chair Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We'll now break and return at 12:15.